Okay, so we're starting in Leviticus chapter 10 this morning. After I put that slide up on the PowerPoint, I looked at it and I thought, well, all I can see is yellow. You have to kind of look at that for a minute to see the two gentlemen involved in that, and the fire and all that business. But nonetheless, I don't know if that's a correct representation of what occurred or not, but it was a very serious thing. We've been talking about sacrifices and how those were important to the people of Israel. What is a sacrifice?
Give something instead of.
Okay. Give something up, to give something instead of something else, to separate from your possession to someone else's. So it's in regard to this, I guess we could also say, and I don't want to put this the wrong way, but we could also say it is a gift. But really the gift is that which God has given us, isn't it? And the gifts that He has given us, we are in turn enabled to give back a portion of that to Him as He has blessed us as Christians today. Of course, we're not talking about bulls or goats or sheep or anything of that nature. We're talking about our giving up of what we are to do and how we are to lay by and store on the first day of the week, as well as what we do during the week and our sacrifice of a holy life unto Him. Which, when you think about it, is not really much of a sacrifice at all, is it, in our day and time, because we have so much. But at the same time, there are temptations that we are faced with, things that come up that remind us of a past life of sin, and sometimes we might have an inclination to go back to that. But God has blessed us with an understanding through His Word that that's not what's good for us, not what's beneficial. And so as we talk about Leviticus chapter 10 today, we talk about the situation, of course, with Nadab and Abihu. And I'm sure all of you could recite the story and what occurred on this occasion with Nadab and Abihu, and we know how they sinned before the Lord. And I mentioned Wednesday evening, we don't know how much time has elapsed between the time that Nadab and Abihu did what they did and the consecration of the priests. We know that it hasn't been a year. We know that it most likely has not been 6 months, because we're going to learn, if you haven't already read, we're going to learn a little bit later on that the period of time that the Israelites spent in the wilderness of Mount Sinai, and it was not that long for all that occurred and all that was built and all that happened before they set out toward the promised land in the initial travels. But whatever time it was really is not the issue, because when temptation comes, sometimes it comes right on the heels of those things that we have done right. The devil does that. He reaches out and he tries to snare us and steer our minds away from that which is good. And he doesn't have to get us to veer very much, does he? Maybe a degree or two, and you can miss the whole course, the whole target. And so it seems to me that's what happened with Nadab and Abihu. And so in Leviticus chapter 10 and verse 1, Moses writes, "Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which He had not commanded them." Now, let me stop there. Just a thought just hits me. As I said that Moses wrote by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, of course. Who's he writing about? We know it's Nadab and Abihu, but who are Nadab and Abihu to him? Nephews, yeah. Aaron's his brother. Nadab and Abihu and Eleazar and Ithamar are his nephews. And so this is family, isn't it? And so sometimes today when we talk about our family, we want to kind of give our family a pass. Could Moses have done that? Maybe, but he knew not to, didn't he? And so he writes the facts as they are, as difficult as it would have been for him, knowing that his brother has lost these two individuals of his family, these two sons, most likely his first and second born. And that would have been a great blow to him. But here Moses, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, writes the truth. And so in verse 2, a fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "It is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me I will be treated as holy, and before all the people I will be honored." So Aaron therefore kept silent. Imagine what the father's grief would have been when he just immediately saw his two sons snuffed out. And Moses also called Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come forward, carry your relatives away from the front of the sanctuary to the outside of the camp." So they came forward and carried them still in their tunics to the outside of the camp, as Moses had said. And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not uncover your heads, nor tear your clothes, so that you may not die, and that he may not become wrathful against all the congregation. But your kinsmen, the whole house of Israel, shall bewail the burning which the Lord has brought about. You shall not even go out from the doorway of the tent of meeting, lest you die. For the Lord's anointing oil is upon you." So they did according to the word of Moses. And so Aaron's sons, just to reiterate what we just read, Nadab and Abihu took fire in their censers. They put the incense on the fire, and they offered profane fire to the Lord. Now, fire went out from Jehovah and consumed them. Moses told Aaron that Jehovah wanted to be holy in the sight of his people, wanted to be sanctified in those that come near him. And the priests of all people should have known that. And so Aaron held his peace. But let's talk about the timing of this for just a minute. The exact timing, as I mentioned earlier, is not necessarily or exactly known. It would not have been very long after the consecration of Aaron and his sons, as we've mentioned previously. The presumption, though, surrounding this event was blasphemous, to say the least. When I say presumption, I'm talking about presumption in the case of Nadab and Abihu, based on what they did. And so, first of all, they decide to take the place of Aaron, their father, in offering incense. It was the high priest's responsibility to take the fire and the incense and take it before the Lord. The second thing is that they did not use fire from the altar of burnt offering. Now, where they got that fire, we don't know. The word strange is used there. And I looked that up in the lexicon, and that word strange is, as you might expect, used in regard to something that was unknown or something that was not specified. It was also used throughout the Old Testament in regard to the word adultery or adulteress. You remember, as we get on into the lessons in the Old Testament, God talks about his people committing adultery against him with idol gods. That's the same word that's used there. And so that is very serious word and a very serious charge against them. Yes, Scott?
In their study, did it seem to be not simple, but more rooted in disobedience versus a substitution unauthorized?
Yeah, I think it was. It was more of an open disregard for what God had said.
Which is disobedience.
Yeah.
It amounts to disobedience.
Right. Yes, George?
I was just going to say, we tell our children, or our boss tells us, this is what you do, and I expect it to be done that way. And then when you arrogantly or lack lackadaisically do what you think would be all right, he ends up being, I know I've been in trouble as a kid because I didn't do exactly what I was told to do.
Right.
And it's really showing respect for the authority and obedience.
Right, right. And that's something that's sorely lacking in our day and time is respect for authority. You know, we're not the boss of everything, you know. We're not the one that makes all the decisions. We have those that have authority over us. And you see that, unfortunately, you see that in the church today when people will make accusations against elders and that type of thing when they have no right or regard, right to do so, or regard for others. Now, that's not to say there's never been a time when an eldership was not wrong about something. But there are ways to go about that, and the Bible's very clear about that. Scott, you had your hand up.
I guess what I'm looking for is the reference to that word when it was used with adultery. It seems more prideful in that sense too. It's that they're taking authority.
Yes.
And saying, well, I think it's okay. And so, and that's where the pride comes in, which again leads back to the whole problem with sin and
Right.
disobedience.
Right. Ken?
In some context, the word strange is hooked up to the occult, which is definitely
Right, and that's the same thing as, you know, being connected with that word adulterous, because the word adultery in the Old Testament many times is connected with word idolatry. So very, very same thing. Right. Yes, Joel?
You can see symptoms of that same thing with people who disregard the law. You'll look at it and say, why did they make a law about that? Regardless, if they make a law about it, you shouldn't violate it.
Right.
You get punished. I know of one incident with someone that was a member of this congregation long ago. They were running late for service, and they got a speeding ticket. Oh, they were so incensed about it, but you're a Christian, not supposed to do things like that.
Right, that's right. Yeah, and in situations like that, we're trying to put the blame off on somebody else rather than understanding why we were late in the first place. So there's a lot to be considered in that regard. Okay, so then also there was a presumption made in regard to the timing of the offering. They didn't offer that incense at the proper time. Both of them went into the tabernacle when it was only one's job to do that, and that the high priest. And so that was a presumption as well. And so there are just a number of things there other than just offering the strange fire itself that are violated. Statutes violated by Nadab and Abihu in doing this. And so it's just, sometimes we'll say, well, that person just went off half-cocked, you know. In other words, they weren't prepared, they weren't ready. The idea is that being fully cocked is that you're prepared, you're ready, and you're doing it in the proper way. But they didn't do that. And so there's a great lesson there for us in those things. Yes, Kim?
I just looked back in Leviticus 9, 24, the verse just before that, where the Lord there came fire out from before the Lord and consumed them. That scared everybody there. And then the next thing they're doing, I don't know how they changed it or what they did, but it had to have been some different ingredients or something. I don't know. But just, it's right after this, at least in the scriptures.
Yeah. And we really don't know how long a period of time lasted. I mean, if it was the same day or the next day or maybe a couple of weeks later or what. But nonetheless, here, that's a good point. God has rained fire down on his altar. He has consumed those burnt offerings, and what more pure and holy fire to obtain than that? Because the fire was continually burning upon the altar. And so, for one then to offer some other fire, and maybe they thought in their minds, and I don't know, but maybe they thought in their minds, well, you know, if we approach the altar now, then we might be consumed because of the fire of the Lord. You know, you never know what they're thinking, but that has nothing to do with the fact that God had commanded for them to take that fire and use that in the burning of the incense. And so then Moses commands Mishael and Elzaphan, who are relatives. They would have been cousins to Aaron, maybe second cousins to Nadab and Abihu, and to carry them out of the camp. And so when he says carry them out of the camp, what does the scripture say specifically about their clothing? Still had their tunics on, right? So this fire from the Lord, which consumed them, did not utterly consume them. The Lord could have, had he chosen, to utterly consume them. And they could have been gone just like that. But he leaves them so that this would be an example to others to see that this is a very serious and grave thing to do. Now,
the passage kind of indicates that they were consumed, not their clothes.
yes,
Remember, the clothes are consecrated.
yes,
They're holy. So that could be a reason why.
it absolutely could. Yeah, that could be a reason. There may have just been their skeletons left, or, you know, something. In some way or another, they had enough of them left that they had to carry them outside the camp. And so, as Albie has mentioned here, not only do you have the distrust in God's law concerning the way that offerings were to be made, but you also have a dishonor to the very clothes that they wore that were holy, given by the Lord and told how, you know, the Lord told Moses how to make them and all of those things. And so those were sacred as well, as he mentions. And so, in some shape, form, or fashion, Nadab and Abihu were not completely physically consumed, perhaps, by the holy fire of Jehovah. But what a thing to have happened. What a thing to have seen before by the people and by Moses and Aaron. And here's Aaron's sons completely are consumed by the fire of the Lord because of a decision they made. It was just really a silly thing. Great consequences. So further instructions for Aaron and Israel. Moses tells Aaron and his sons to stay in their priestly garments with their mitres on, or the turban and the band of gold on their heads. Don't take that off your head, lest you die. Do not rend your clothes. Do not be angry with the people, lest you die. And so what's that all about? Dustin?
They had committed a sin. They had disrespected the law of God. As priests, even though these were his sons, they were commanded not to show outward grief because it would basically be condoning that action. They
Right.
would remain priestly in the conducting of this, what was being carried out as Moses told them by God.
Right. Sometimes we refer to this as coddling in this extreme situation. Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, were commanded to stay in their priestly attire, administer their priestly office. And so what Moses is trying to get all of us to see here is that this breaking forth on the Lord, if you will, this incorrect way of offering this incense that he commanded not, was worse than the death of these two men. And you say, well, man, that's pretty tough. But it's serious. God is to be holy, is to be sanctified in the eyes of his people. He is to be holy in the eyes of his people. And as a matter of fact, at the end of this chapter, in the beginning of the next chapter, we learn that God says, be ye holy, for I am holy. I expect my people to be holy. And so he's serious about those things. It's not just a flippant breaking of a rule and I get past it and I'll offer my sacrifice. There was no coming back from this.
Yeah.
Yes.
One thing that struck me when all this was being discussed is Romans 13 talks about being in submission to the authorities. God put his stamp of approval on the people he put in position. And we're to be as obedient to that as we would be to God. And what people just, like I said, people are incensed about their relatives, friends, whatever, are being charged with a crime they're guilty of. And the same thing is here. It's the same difference. We're supposed to have that kind of regard for the laws of the land, as long as they don't go against what God says. But that's completely lost.
Yes, that's correct. In connection with the fire, the premise that I put forth in regard to the different kind of fire being used, there's a discussion of that in the top half of the page on page 107, if you haven't read that already, in regard to our study guide here, or in our study guide, where there are two positions that are given. At the top of the page, it says, the sin of Nadab and Abihu was in offering strange fire, which the Lord had not commanded. Yet it was after the death of Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus 16 that we learn that God had given the command that this fire was to be taken from the altar. And so these instructions are given in the context of the Day of Atonement. The high priest was to take the incense in with him when he took the blood of the bullock that was a sin offering for himself into the most holy place. Now it may be inferred that this command meant that under ordinary circumstances as well, the coals for burning incense had to come from the altar of burnt offering, but there's no specific command stated until Leviticus 16. However, this is my thinking on the thing, and it's a more traditional way of thinking. God gave all of those commandments to Moses when Moses was with him and on the mount and during those 40 days and 40 nights. All of that pertained to the building of the tabernacle, the consecration of the priest, the sacrifices, all of that had been discussed between God and Moses. And so they would have known what to offer, how to offer the fire, and how to offer the incense and all of that. It was already laid out. It's just not until Leviticus 16 that Moses sees fit to mention that in the text. Scott?
There goes the word strange.
Yes, right. How could it be strange if they were not told
They weren't said.
what to offer? Right, very good. Any comments or questions about that? Yes, Mark?
I have a question. Did you say earlier that only the high priest was to burn the incense? Because in Luke, it does say that the other priests did that in the temple.
Okay. Read that passage for us, Mark, please.
In Luke chapter 1, starting in verse 7. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren and both were advanced in years. Now while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense.
Okay. All right, so the inference there is, since he was not a high priest, then he would have been offering incense before the Lord and still had the opportunity to do that. Okay. All right. Looking back at Exodus 24, and I don't believe that's not it.
30.
Exodus 30. Yes. An altar, Exodus 30 verse 1, you make the altar a place for burning incense. You shall make it of acacia wood. He goes on to tell about that. Place it. And Aaron shall burn fragrant incense on it. He shall burn it every morning. This is verse 7. Aaron shall burn fragrant incense on it. He shall burn it every morning when he trims the lamps. And when Aaron trims the lamps at twilight, he shall burn incense. Then he be a perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations.
So I guess maybe it's possible something changed between the tabernacle and the temple.
Yeah, there's a possibility. I don't know. I'd have to look at Zechariah a little bit more about that, I guess, to be able to understand whether he was indeed the high priest or not. It doesn't say he was. But go ahead.
Well, David, when he was king, he made a whole series of courses. So I guess there was a lot of people descended from Aaron by that time, and so they all got a chance, and then whole bunches of courses that would be, they had it this week, and the next week will have it the next week, or I don't know if it was a week, but there was, David made some changes with my plan.
Okay. Yeah, it just says that Zacharias was a certain priest, so don't know. Yes, Scott.
It also says there in verse 9, according to the custom of the priestly office. So
According to what?
According to the custom. So maybe at this point, it become a custom or a tradition even.
Yeah,
Maybe they've already started going off course, perhaps.
perhaps. Yeah, may have been. Yes, Dustin.
We were talking about the seriousness of it, and I can see that you popped it up on the screen now, when you get down to verse 8 and 9. Even when Aaron was separated from the people and his cousins were separated, they were not allowed to show grief in front of the people, and they were also not allowed to drink alcohol and make time of eternal pain. They were not allowed to grieve this at all. They were back by themselves inside the tent.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Don't show grief. Don't show grief in front of the Lord. This is a holy thing that he has done. In effect, what he did was he cleansed the priesthood, didn't he, with the killing of Nadab and Abihu. And the same thing today, you know, when we, and unfortunate as it is, and as much as we don't desire it, you know, when we have to bring discipline on a member, that's cleansing the congregation. And it's the same thing that God did here. Yes, Scott.
It seems to me when he says, for the Lord's oil, in verse 7, for the Lord's oil, anointing oil is upon you. And then he talks about don't drink alcohol. It seems to me it's a purity thing.
Yes.
You've been purified, you're in this place. You know, and that's the end of you'll be defiled, if you will. I think you'll lose your purity. You can't have that.
Right, right. And a tough pill, no doubt. A tough pill to swallow for. And I have compassion for Aaron and his sons that are left, you know, because this is a great loss for them. But at the same time, they're called to a higher calling than a physical family. There is a higher calling. Yes, George?
In Leviticus 10:9, where you're at right now, talking about not drinking wine or strong drink, that sort of infers that Nadab and Abihu may have been under the influence, but that's speculation.
Yeah, some have speculated that might have been the case, but I don't know anything that would indicate that from here. But he does tell Aaron directly, drink no wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when you go into the tent of meeting, that you die not. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. And so, if that is connected or not, we don't know specifically, but God puts the rule down, the statute down. Make sure you don't do that.
All that have been influenced by that, it dulls judgment for one thing, and you don't treat things with the same regard.
Yes.
That much I do know.
Yes, that's true. That's for sure. Dusty, you have another comment?
It's where it says a statute forever throughout your generations. That's cleared up in 10 and 11, that you make no difference between holy and unholy, between clean and unclean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's essentially saying, you got to make up your mind here. Are you going to perform the office of the priesthood? Are you going to be pure before the people? Are you going to be pure before me? Or are you going to die?
Pretty straightforward.
Right. So he did make as Dustin was mentioning, he said, make a distinction between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, to teach Israel all of the commandments that Jehovah had spoken unto them by Moses. And then he kind of puts a pin in that, if you will, at that point in time. And then, beginning with verse 12, he speaks to Aaron and his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, and tells them to make an offering, to eat their portion of the meal offering beside the altar. Now, this is the altar of burnt offering here that he's talking about. To take the wave breast and the heave thigh and eat it with all of his family in a clean place before Jehovah. What had occurred with the other portions, not the portions that Aaron and his family are to partake of, but what had occurred with the other portions of these sacrifices, the meal offering, the breast and heave offering, the peace offerings, the other portions of that animal, what happened to them? What were they used?
Sacrifice to God.
Yeah, sacrifice to God. And so they were holy. And so then, since they were holy, Aaron and his sons were to partake of those things, to be purified, if indeed they had any thoughts or any intentions that might have gone through their minds that would have made them impure, or unholy. That's what the part of that peace offering is for, that they are partaking in. That's what the part of that meal offering that they are to partake in, is to purify themselves. That's the holy sacrifice that they're to partake of. So he says, you take those and you eat those, specifically the portion of the meal offering beside the altar of burnt offering, and then with your family in a clean place, which would not have been, the family obviously wouldn't have been there in the court of the tabernacle, but they would have eaten that in a clean place, either inside or outside the camp. And you'll recall, the reason I want to believe that Nadab and Abihu did this almost immediately after these other sacrifices had been offered and God's fire rained down and consumed them from the altar, because here's what Moses does next. He searches diligently for that goat of the sin offering. And what's he trying to do? He's trying to then offer this and make this holy before God, so that the people would not be guilty, not found guilty, so that the priesthood would be pure and sanctified before God. And so he searches for that goat, which is the sin offering, but it had already been consumed. So he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar for not eating of it in the holy place. So Aaron says, Moses, after all this happened here, my sons have sinned before the Lord. They have suffered the consequences of that. They've been taken outside the camp, and we presume buried. Would it have been fitting to God for us to go and partake of that offering after all of that had happened? And Moses, like Aaron previously, held his peace. He said, well, Aaron, you're probably right about that. So a very serious situation. And Moses was full of zeal in regard to making sure that from that point forward, the priest did what was right. And the priesthood was pure and clean, consecrated. All right, any final comments or questions about chapter 10? Yes, Bill?
It shows us under no uncertain terms that God does not compromise. And also that his punishment is swift and severe.
Yes. Yes, it was. think about Moses' instructions to Aaron and his remaining sons, well, we didn't discuss this, but think about the people and how that would have affected them. Can you see them just go, you know, here's the fire from the Lord has come down. And they have seen that, and they have shouted and bowed their heads, and then the next thing you know, Nadab and Abihu are being killed by fire from the Lord. I imagine some of those people didn't know what's going to happen next. You know, they were just wondering what in the world is going to happen next. So Moses is in effect trying to pull the people and the priesthood together and with that sin offering. But your comment is well taken from the standpoint that God does not compromise. His laws are His laws. And they're very serious. Yes, George?
I remember being presented before us that some people say, those were taught in Europe, they liked the God of the New Testament, but they didn't like the God of the Old Testament. Well, back to this, the Old Testament being schoolmaster to us. What makes us think that God is not going to carry out what He has said He's going to do if we don't live our life the way that He's directed us? And we've got a lot of lessons right there in the Old Testament. That's another reason for studying. We can see all the things that those people were just like us. Mm-hmm. They had free will. They could do what they wanted to. But when we see how fast God punished, well, the man, we'll be talking about that soon, I'm sure, about the man gathering sticks on the Sabbath. He was dealt with swiftly. So we need to stop and remember that. It's the same God.
Right. Yeah, and to be so thankful for His patience.
Really.
And His mercy toward us. We just, one day we will receive severe consequences. And that's not to say that we don't receive consequences in this life, but there will be severe consequences, as you say, if we have been unholy. All right, so in Leviticus chapter 11, we begin to talk about a lot of those animals that haven't necessarily been brought up yet. The differentiation between clean and unclean. And so this goes back to what really God is telling the people and telling Moses and Aaron and the priesthood. You got to discern between that which is clean and that which is unclean, that which is unholy and that which is holy. And so he begins by talking about that with the idea of those beasts and animals that were suitable and unsuitable to be consumed by the Israelites. And so Jehovah spoke to Moses, and he told him of the living things that could be eaten. Cloven hoof, choose the cud, that would be a cow, sheep, goat, that type of thing. Those things that they have been offering to God and have the priests have been, taking a part of. And even the offerer for the peace offering would have a portion of that sacrifice that he could eat. And then there were unclean animals like the camel, the rabbit, the hare, the pig. And so there are some then that chew the cud, like the camel, like the rabbit, but they're not cloven hoof. And so there likewise would have been some differentiation there to be made. It wasn't that you could get one of three right and it'd be okay. Just like Billy said a moment ago, God did not make any kind of error in regard to what people might judge. His rules were true, were righteous. So if I decided that I wanted to, as an Israelite, wanted to eat a rabbit, then I got one out of two things right, didn't I? Rabbit didn't have cloven hoof. then I would be guilty of eating an unclean animal. Fish with fins and scales were clean. And so the Israelites would not have eaten catfish, because catfish don't have scales. Water creatures without scales and fins were unclean, as I've just suggested. These were not just unclean, they were an abomination to God. And you say, well, maybe you're splitting hairs there. Well, maybe I am. But you know, for one to eat something that was unclean or touch something that was unclean, he could offer a sacrifice to cleanse himself from that. If you continually did that, that was an abomination to God. And we know what God did with those that were an abomination to him. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the osprey, the vulture, regular vulture, the kite, etc., are unclean. These are basically carrion eating animals. They feast on other dead animals. The winged creeping things that go upon all fours are unclean except for locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers. Who do we know that made a diet of locusts? John the Baptist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was not eating anything that was unclean when he ate those locusts. And so I find it very interesting that the Lord chose locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers, because that was one of the plagues against Egypt, wasn't it? The locusts. And they devoured everything that remained in Egypt. Yes, George?
That did, I guess you'd say it was a consolation when you figured that locusts came, devoured everything that was green, and
yes,
they could be eaten because they pretty well took care of all the stuff you could have.
right. That's right. Yeah, they would be left. And a good source of protein, I understand. All right, so the remedy for those things, if one touched the carcass of these unclean animals, he would be unclean until the evening. Whoever had any of the carcass upon them would wash their clothes and be unclean until evening. And so if you were out in the field and, I don't know, maybe you were clearing new ground or something, and you came up against an unclean animal, it was dead, you didn't know it, you rubbed up against it, maybe some of its blood or some of its hair, or, you know, whatever got on your clothing, then you would take those clothes and you would wash them, and then you would remain unclean until evening. The animal that parted the hoof but not cloven-footed or chewed the cud was unclean. So there was a special type of hoof that was cloven-footed. Think of the cow, the bull, the sheep, the goat. And so this would also exclude those camels that were cloven-hoofed, or that were, I'm sorry, their hooves were parted, but they weren't cloven-hoofed. So a lot of those, some of these animals, you know, we don't see very often. Even, you know, there's some of them that are not in existence anymore, but the Israelites would have known these animals, obviously. Animals that walked on all fours on paws were unclean. So no cats, no big cats. Talking about the lion, tiger, what we would refer to as a house cat.
And the dog.
Many others, the dog, yeah, many others like that. Wolf, coyote. Again, many of these animals were animals that preyed off of dead animals. Same instructions applied to touching or bearing the carcass as other unclean animals. Weasels, mice, tortoises, ferrets, chameleons, lizards, snails, and moles were all unclean. And so some of those, and I was looking, so let me see if I can find a passage that talks about some of those animals that we probably have not heard the name of before. Okay, verse 19. the stork, the heron in its kinds, the hoopoe, and the bat. What does what's the King James Version or New King James Version say there about the hoopoe?
Lapwing.
What?
The lapwing.
Spell it for me.
Lapwing.
Lapwing. Okay. All right. I'm assuming that would be something maybe that would have the capability of flying, some type of bird or creature of that nature. And so some of those I was able to get the names of, some of them I wasn't able to get the names of. So anyway, interesting facts here. The vessels, anything upon which a portion of a dead, unclean animal fell, a vessel of wood, clothing, skin, or some sack that was made, must be washed in water, and it would be unclean until evening. And so when we talk about this uncleanness, that meant that that particular person could not involve himself in what? Sacrifice.
Anything holy.
Anything holy, partaking of the Passover feast. If you on that 14th day of the month come in contact, then you were unclean. You couldn't partake of the Passover. Now there were, as the Wardens go on to explain on the next page or so, there were options for you to partake of that Passover, and that's written over in Numbers. I'm not going to go to Numbers right now. We'll study that a little bit later. But there was a second Passover observance available for those that had become unclean. Unclean earthen vessels were to be broken. So, for example, pottery. If there was an unclean animal that had its carcass had touched a piece of pottery or something of that nature, then that pottery was broken. Any food or drink would be unclean. And so today, archaeologists, there are a number of reasons why they would find a piece of broken pottery. But in digs, oftentimes they'll find broken pottery along with pottery that's unbroken. So not just from the events of it being covered up, or the sands of time or whatever we might refer it to. There were times when you would find broken pottery around the camp of the Israelites because of these very things. So a lot to be taken into consideration in regard to that. Unclean until the evening. If an unclean animal touches a well or fountain, the water is clean itself, but the one who retrieves the unclean animal is unclean until evening. So that was kind of a catch-22 situation, wasn't it? Here we've got this unclean animal that somehow or another has fallen over into the well. And so someone, upon learning of that, someone is going to have to make a decision. Do I retrieve that animal and keep the people from getting sick because of that and drinking this water? Or do I leave the animal and maybe someone else will find it and retrieve it? They'll be unclean instead of me. So that's the kind of decisions, that had to be made. And it's not any different really than some of those crazy things that we think of, Oh, I've got company that's come into town. Should I stay with them, or should I go to church, or what should I do? So all those types of things. If it fall upon, that is the unclean animal, fall upon sown seed, it is clean. But if the sown seed has been watered in, then it becomes unclean. You've got to replant. If any clean animal die, whoever touches it, bears or eats of the carcass is unclean until evening. Every creeping thing that goes on its belly hath many feet are unclean. So millipedes, centipedes, lobster,
and snails,
snakes, all those types of things would have been unclean to the Israelites. Well, I'm glad we live under the new covenant. I sure do like lobster.
Yeah, really.
Not that I eat it a lot, but I sure do like it. So God says, "Be ye holy, for I am holy." Jehovah commanded these statutes to keep his people, Israel, clean and holy. He brought them out of Egypt and was their God and required them to be holy. The law of the beast, the law of the bird, etc., was to be followed. There was no way around that, no fudging the law. It's like Billy said, Jehovah did not, negotiate in regard to the law. Scott, do you have a comment? Okay. Anything else before we close our lesson today?
With God, there's no iffy.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much for your time and attention this morning.